Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Hermitage Dhamma. Been reflecting on a little bit just the nature of sort of being in charge here, which is I find fairly easy compared to someplace like a Baigiri, where I've only had temporary, actually only one temporary time, being the senior monk there. So I have a lot of gratitude for Lumpur Pasano, Ajahn Krunadhammo, now Ajahn Yaniko, the solo abbot, and all of the many senior monks who've led monasteries. There's one monk now, Pawak Sayadaw, who I believe usually has between 400 and 800 monks who live in his monastery. So it's a interesting reflection. Think about that. There's two other monks here with me. Yeah, so not too much changes here in the Hermitage. Just the daily life, and of course there's the change in the mind that occurs, and being with others, learning how to be skillful with others. I've been reflecting a little bit about a question from the Tuesday live stream around, we were talking about the hindrance of doubt, and then we also spoke about the hindrances in general, the 5 hindrances. And one of the questions that came up was, do we just practice with these hindrances when we're in meditation? Or is it, do they just, because we're not noticing them, they just sort of like fade in the background, and we're not needing to practice with them in our daily life or our informal time rather than our formal practice. And that's a important, very important question, because we don't really stop practicing, or we don't. It's not so helpful to see that we're necessarily practicing in quite a different way when we're sitting in meditation. So some of you have been sitting before this talk, and you might notice the difference. You're now engaging with technology, or you're listening to my voice. But essentially it's the same quality. One was paying attention. One's inclining the mind towards a sense of wholesomeness, or something that is wholesome for one. And essentially this is happening all the time. We're trying to do this all the time. In our practice, we can sometimes divide what it is we're doing by, like, the time that I'm able to practice, or the time that I'm supposed to be practicing, or the time that I am. Even the idea of the word practice can mean something separate. But it's not that way at all, actually. The Buddha pointed out the Noble Eightfold Path. This is the practice. It's something that we practice when we're in sitting meditation, something that we practice when we're walking, standing up, lying down, whether we're formally doing so in quiet, without engaging in much activity, or we're doing these 4 postures when we're quite active, dealing with our life, taking care of business, talking with friends, family, co-workers. when we're relating to a computer, we want to actually be using this Eightfold Path. So like, for example, right view. Using right view in that sense is like, well, where's the dukkha, where's there stress involved with this? Is there somehow desire that's causing that stress? So we're kind of using the tools that the Buddha gave us all the time. And we don't want to divide our experience into particular moments or times when we're able to be mindful or we're able to be concentrated. We'll bring up, right effort. We want to try to be doing that all the time. The juxtaposition is that with something like sitting meditation, it can feel very, very much like we have a stronger ability to take care of our minds and to watch over our minds in a much more careful way. That's true to a certain extent, but then we don't want to kind of throw out the baby with the bathwater and just say, okay, I'm done with that. Now I'll just move on with my rest of my day, and I hope that the peace that I had in the meditation kind of continues. It will have quite an impact, when we sit down quietly. That's going to have an impact on whatever activities we have, or that we engage in when we're not doing that. But we're not just using the meditation as a separate experience. We're using that to kind of realign our minds towards what it is we're trying to accomplish or do with the practice. So it's sort of like, it's understandable that when one is speaking with another or engaging in various duties throughout the day, sometimes complicated tasks, we are going to lose our concentration. So there is going to be a level where things dip. Mindfulness can decrease, or mind won't feel necessarily as collected. But the whole point of our formal practice is that we can lend that practice to our daily life so that we're actually kind of keeping ourselves at a higher level of understanding and practice throughout our action, our daily actions that we're doing. So it's like I gave that talk a couple of weeks ago about forgetting to take out the trash. It's like, well, I can kind of remember, I remember that I forgot. I go take out the trash. But all that while I need to be utilizing the Dhamma, utilizing my experience, utilizing what I'm learning and what I've learned before to keep the mind focused, to not allow it to go into greed, hatred, or delusion. And when it does, to notice that and to be aware of it and try to uplift the mind. So it's, the states of non-greed, non-delusion, non-ill will or hatred, those are what are entering the mind. So, we can have generosity and kindness and clarity. These are things that we're accentuating. But we can only do that if we're continuing our practice all day long. So many of you might remember Ajahn Chah's encouragement to be like, to continue one's mindfulness like as if one's pouring a vessel, and out of that vessel, water is falling. And we don't want to make our mindfulness like a drip, drip, and then stopping. Actually, what would be best as a metaphor is like the water just continuously flowing, and we're not stopping and starting and stopping and starting. So the point of meditation is to gain insight, but it's also to kind of make sure that flow continues throughout our days and our life, so that we're not going into these times of meditation. And so why I'm speaking about this is because I think it's important to actually move away from the sense that formal meditation is where it's at, or formal meditation is where I do my practice, rather that informal or formal, it's all part of what it is we're trying to do. It's part of the Noble Eightfold Path. So an insect lands on you, and how do you practice right action? It starts to sting you. then you might instinctively move to hit it. But that kind of remembering that there's life there, and we don't want to destroy life. We want to also have compassion and remember that if some being swatted us with their hand, it wouldn't be something that would be in our best interest or something we like. So we do the same, and the only way we can have that sense of how to encourage the right action in ourselves is through our clarity and through our continual practice throughout the day. This is difficult, and of course most of you know this. It's not like I'm really saying anything new, but it's a very good reminder because it's so easy to slip throughout the day. And unfortunately, what we often don't see is if we think of meditation as sort of the superior aspect of what we're doing, and we often then can drop what it is we're doing throughout our daily life. For example, when we're speaking to somebody, then that has an impact on our meditation, on our formal practice. And if we're not encouraging ourselves to walk this noble Eightfold Path in every moment of our life, then whatever time we're practicing, in quotes, we're just not. We're going to be weakening that sense of understanding we can have. So, that's why the Buddha really encouraged these things around like right livelihood. We can reflect around how it is we're gaining a livelihood in our life. So, for monks and nuns, we need to be careful about that. In a way, like something like even like hinting to a person. Like, I'd like to, it'd be nice if I could have this or that, or, we have to be careful, and I know I can fall into that as well, and I always regret that later on. Oh, geez, I need to be much more careful around expressing a desire in a way. And sometimes it's okay when somebody's made that invitation, so they say, oh, I'm inviting you, but one has to just be really careful about how it is we use speech, because even when one's a monk or not a monk, or a nun or not a nun, it doesn't matter. When you're kind of hinting at somebody, there's ways that can be destructive, and we have to be kind of careful with our speech and careful what it is we're asking of others, because we try not to impose too much. We try not to be too pushy in our life. And if we just give into that action, then for monastics, that's one of the reflections around right livelihood. It's like, how are we receiving the requisites for ourselves? Are we doing it in a proper way? How are we conducting ourselves when we collect our alms food, our daily alms food? Is it in a way that we're just assuming people are going to give us food because we're so great, or we expect particular food or particular drinks or tonics or whatever it might be. So there's a check on that, how we're engaging with that, and for lay people who are using money, one has to think about how that money is generated, and so I know that for some people there can be a struggle around this. Like, let's say you work for something like a drone company, and some of your drones are sold to hobbyists, and some of your drones are sold to the military. So one might kind of feel like, oh wow, that's something I need to be careful of. And he said, well, at least my drones are just for reconnaissance, or are just for kind of spying. They're not dropping bombs. But then let's say, oh, now there's a new drone that one's creating, and you have to make this drone, and it's going to be dropping bombs on people. So right livelihood would keep us in check around that. Say, oh, how can I deal with that? Maybe you can still work in the drone business, but not be part of drones that are dropping weapons. So we're kind of trying to be careful. Another way is, in dealing with alcohol or killing of animals. So that's one thing that people are trying to engage in, and that's sort of uh, essentially an equation in a sense. It's sort of like, either you're doing it or you're not doing it with how one makes one's livelihood. But in other ways, it's not always so clear. Like for example, in one way, I know there was a woman she was a veterinarian, and a small percentage of her job was putting animals to sleep, helping them die. We could say help, but how do we know that all those animals necessarily wanted to die when they died? So that particular veterinarian decided, I'm not gonna be involved in that anymore, and so they decided, okay, I'm going to refer people who need to have their animals killed to another veterinarian. She luckily worked in a practice with others, so she could say, "Oh, I don't actually engage in that." So there's decisions we're making all the time, and there's things that we need to be careful of. But sometimes those are kind of areas of our life, like I'm mentioning livelihood, where it seems quite obvious. But there can be other things where, is it so clear, for example, with speech, that are we clear enough in ourselves that we're actually knowing when we're harming someone with our speech? So we might be overtaken by, aversion or slight ill will, and the way we're speaking with somebody is slightly harsh. Or I know for myself, the big check I have for myself around speech when I'm talking to somebody is if I'm talking about somebody else to a particular person. And if I am, what is that tinged with? Because I can speak factually about somebody else. So-and-so is in the kitchen right now. I can tell another person. Or probably more truthfully, so-and-so was in the kitchen the last time I saw him. Because maybe I don't know, actually, if he's still in the kitchen. But if I said, oh, so-and-so is in the kitchen, doing his thing, cooking, and so loud, and it's like, I wish he'd just be mindful of the fact that other people were in the room. You know what I mean? So that's a more obvious situation, but we might say like, oh, he's in the kitchen chopping away. And we just need to be careful around how, when we speak about others, for example, how when it's factual, it's fine, but when it's tainted with a sense of criticism or judgment about what they're doing, we can't always see that, because if we're engaging in a habit that we're not really aware of because it's so normal for us, then we don't see that we're actually dividing relationships where we're kind of criticizing other people, and we might not be aware of it. We might be criticizing other people to other people, so speaking about somebody who's not present. So for myself, I find that can be quite difficult to just keep all of my speech from, if I do ever mention somebody else to another person, then how do I keep that from not being tinged by ill will or aversion or greed or whatever it might be? And it's not easy. We can think about another realm of just like the tendency for ourselves to complain, and how easy it is to complain, and what that often introduces is a sense of bitterness about the world, or negativity, that it might be true, some of the things that we're complaining about. There's not a negation of that, but how much do we really need to say about things that are true, that incline our minds toward negativity or others towards negativity? I know one teacher had decided that he wouldn't complain for about 3 months. He just said, I'm not going to complain. And I think that that's very difficult. You try to just not not encourage yourself to say anything that there's wrong about the world. Well, there's a lot wrong with the world, and it's quite difficult to stop ourselves from not only seeing that, but then vocalizing it. The higher aspect of that is then when we actually see our own internal complaining and we start to refrain from that. Um, and so that's really where we need to look internally and say, like, oh, how am I might be restraining myself internally, but am I actually, I'm sorry, externally, but am I actually doing the same internally? Oh, there's that complaining mind again. What's right actually about this situation? And I can say, oh, I do these live streams, and right before it, I always notice there's some nervousness, or the heart is beating quicker. What am I going to talk about? I'm not sure. Let that go, see what comes up. And I can incline towards a sort of negativity around it, like, oh, this is stressful. Is it really worth it? Is anybody really benefiting? Whatever it might be. Rather than, saying something to myself like, well, whatever comes out, may it be a benefit to whoever is listening. May they gain some knowledge or understanding. May there be some clarity that arises, or may there be some kindness, or a sense of goodwill, or generosity, or caring, or whatever it might be. So there's a wish, like, oh, may I do this for the betterment of others, rather than a focus on the self and what's wrong. And so I think we have to be aware of our internal states, and that's where this sense of being quite careful with how it is we think about our practice and our sort of daily life, and to try to understand much more that it's an all-day practice. It's an all-day, sometimes all-night practice. I think the Buddha's only time he said that we might have difficulty, or it's not quite possible to train our mindfulness is while we're sleeping. But one can learn to be mindful, for example, if when you realize you're dreaming, or the Buddha's recommendation is to be mindful when you're falling asleep and when you're waking up. So it's that kind of, you encourage yourself right before you're drifting off. That's a time to be careful with your mind, and to remember, oh yeah, when I wake up, I want to be devoted to wakefulness. I think one of the questions people often have is on a retreat or something, at the end of the retreat, they say, how can I continue this state? It's almost like an absolute question. It almost always comes up with people at the end of sitting a retreat, a 1-week retreat or whatever length. So how can I continue what I've been practicing in the same way? And how can I make my practice the same way in my daily life? And you can't. It's not really possible until maybe the higher states of enlightenment, until it's really clear. But one can encourage oneself to some degree to do that. Because the reason I say you can't is because a retreat is in, for example, a very special condition where you're surrounded by a lot of people who are aiming towards silence, and the whole Eightfold Path right there, just really encouraging one's mind in that way. And when one moves away from that very special condition and experience, it's just not possible to maintain the exact same sort of actions of the mind, the exact way of being that you had during a retreat, because the conditions have changed. But one can incline one's mind towards that. And of course, the question is not, how do I integrate my practice into my daily life? It's how do I integrate my daily life into my practice? So it's like it's not seeing how you put this sort of encapsulated time or these encapsulated actions that you're going to do throughout your day. It's like, oh, how do I make what it is I'm doing throughout my day fit this new schema of the Buddha's teaching, of the path that I'm trying to bring into my life. So my life becomes the path rather than fitting the path in there from time to time. And it's not easy. And so we don't want to say like, well, meditation, it's just a lot easier for me to focus my mind. It's just so hard. I can go throughout an entire day and I just realize I haven't been aware. But that's sort of a cop-out, isn't it? You just think, well, it's only during meditation I'll do this. So we need to strive in a way, not in a way that's kind of punishing ourselves for not being good enough, but just to sort of that nice, kind encouragement we can offer to ourselves about what it is we're doing, how it is that we are bringing up the Eightfold Path, the Buddha's teaching, to try just to incline our mind towards renunciation and non-harming, non-ill will. This is what right intention is. And in order to have right intention, we do need to incorporate morality, our sila. So we want to refrain from doing things that are going to cause others harm, because not only can this harm go out into the world, but it goes internally, it goes into our heart. And that's why sila is so important. It's such an important part of the path, and the aspects of speech, action, and livelihood are really they're so much part of how we follow the Buddha's teachings, how we follow sila in our life. So I encourage others to try to bring up this sense of looking at how we have sometimes this tendency to see our practice in terms of times, see our practice in terms of when it is that we're going to practice and when it is we're not, and try to have a more holistic approach to our understanding of following our experience all the time. There isn't a time when we're not practicing. And even when we're noticing that we're not practicing, we're still practicing in that moment because we're noticing it. And it goes with the same aspect that we don't, again, as I mentioned, we don't need to chide ourselves when we fall off the path, when we're not clear, or we say like, oh, the last 4 hours I haven't been doing this or that, or you get into some trouble, you say something you regret, or you do engage in something that was harmful in terms of like an action of body, or even just your mind going astray. This isn't an occasion to get out the whip and tell yourself how bad of a practitioner you are. It's more an occasion to celebrate and to say, yes, I see what went wrong, and I'm so happy that I have the ability to see that, because it's possible I could be in a life where I have no notice. You can think of also trying to remember, well, I haven't killed anybody today, I haven't stolen anything, I've tried to be responsible with my sexuality, my desires and my greed, I haven't taken any intoxicants, and of course, but I did do these other things, but you try to remember that there are a lot of good things that you're doing that are not perhaps grosser misconducts, and try to put also into perspective, maybe the thing that you're making a huge deal out of doesn't need to be that way. But then sometimes we do engage in grosser misconduct, and unfortunately I know for myself, things like that can have a very unfortunate effect on the mind. It can last years when we have big regrets about how we've treated somebody, and it can go on. It's very hard. It can lead the mind into more doubt, questioning of the self, and so we want to guard ourselves from those larger misconducts by actually being careful around the smaller things we do. And And that's a very important part of this path. So I think that's enough today for a reflection. If there are any questions or comments people want to make about that, please feel free to add something to the chat. Marilyn had mentioned that it seems like our mindfulness and intention, as well as honesty with ourselves, is such a big part of this. Yes, absolutely. I think I was mentioning both of those things, the first two, mindfulness and our intentions. But honesty is a huge part of our life. I've mentioned before, my father used to point to a quote at his desk that was, I remember for the most part in his office in one of the houses he lived in for about 25 years, and it was, "To thine own self be true," which I think, I can't remember actually who said it. I thought maybe it was Theodore Roosevelt, but I think it's a lot older than that. What does that mean? It means that we're really looking at our heart and what our inclinations are, and we're not lying to ourselves. And this is a tendency I think a lot of human beings have, to kind of cut corners a little bit and just not really admit it to ourselves. You kind of know what you're doing, but then you say, "Oh, it's okay. That's not a big deal." You know? And that's exactly where we're seeing the smaller aspects, or the little actions that we do that actually can cause a much larger action out in the world with other people. So if we're willing to lie to ourselves or not be honest with ourselves internally, then the Buddha pointed out that there's really nothing we're incapable of. We can do anything that's quite unskillful. And he talks about that with lying. Once a person is willing to lie, then they're just essentially lying to others. That habit is coming from lying to oneself as well. And so it can be just a sense that there's no sense anymore of what there is. One is unwilling to do, because you can just end up lying to yourself. It's all right if I kill this guy. It's not a big deal. It's not really going to harm me in the end. They need to die anyway. And so something very gross like that can occur, to take another human being's life. And that maybe just occurred because over a very long period of time, one has lied to oneself about the engaging in such a immoral act. I think it was Dostoevsky, and who wrote, what was the book? I can't remember what it is right now. It's not. It deals with. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the title right now. But a fellow who's just thinking a lot about killing a person, killing a woman, who's a very wealthy woman, and he thought, "Oh, I won't really do it," and then kind of keeps with that sense of, "Well, but what if I did do it?" And just this toying of it, and just the beginning of toying with it, rather than saying, "Oh, I'm not even going to go there with thoughts like that. That's something I could never do." But because this character thinks about it, and then starts to develop a plan, and then it becomes an elaborate plan of how he does it. It just sets in course the entire possibility of a murder that this character actually does engage in the end. And that's that just occurred from that slight toying of the mind, and how actually it seemed like in the end it was impossible not to murder that person. And it just started from that little thought, and then continued over a longer period of time. So yeah, we really do need to be careful about how it is we're speaking to ourselves, whether we're lying to ourselves. I often think about that with right speech and not lying. That it's the Buddha is often speaking about our outward actions in regards to right speech, but inwardly we have a speech going on that most of us are very aware of, and it can be divisive. It can be lying. We can be harsh with ourselves or others in our minds. or just engage in constant idle chatter. And that's where I think a sort of the higher practice is not just using this as a sense of our external speech, but thinking about it in our internal way. Because as I just mentioned, if we are talking to ourselves in particular ways that are really go against right speech, then we're just going to continue those same ways when we're speaking with others. So there's a question here about how does right speech relate to humor and joking? What is right humor? And then my favorite lie is the statement, just kidding. I have a propensity towards this, and I admit that I can not be as guarded as I'd prefer to be. Humor is a very important thing because the easiest way to use humor is to make a small lie, and then it's just kidding, right? And there's been debate about whether the Buddha actually meant that we're always telling the truth. So this is a sort of Ajahn Jeff, Ajahn Brahm debate, because there's a sense, Ajahn Jeff says, you can use irony, but you don't have to lie using irony, right? But there's another sense, Ajahn Brahm talks about where you're sort of setting up something, but you have no intention for the person to actually believe you after you've told a joke. So you say something that kind of catches a person off guard because it's not actually true, but it's immediately just kidding. And that I think is whether or not we theoretically think about it as, well, it's not the same as lying because one doesn't plan to encourage this mistruth to go on. I don't think it's skillful, and I've seen in myself how when I engage in that, it's quite harmful. So a couple of times I was mentioning something recently to Tangino, and I did just say, just kidding. But both times he believed me before I said that. And I realized that there's times when I refrain from that, and there's other times that I've engaged in that in my life as a monk, and or not a monk. And when I'm refraining in that, it feels quite good because, there's still a sense of humor that can be had without having to say anything that's not true in order to get a rise of humor of laughter. But what happens, and what I've seen in other people that do that frequently, and what makes me actually have some sense of fear around doing it, is that they say, oh, I don't believe this guy, I don't trust him, I don't take him seriously. I mean, whenever he says it, I'm not sure if he's telling the truth or not, he's just about to tell a joke. I don't know. And so what happens is that people can feel tricked by what we're saying, and then they don't trust us. So I think that humor is in the realm of kindness. There's a kindness that somebody might feel in terms of our humor. We can feel like that's really funny, rather than I've just been tricked. So we don't have to necessarily lose our trust in another person when somebody is engaging in humor. And so that's where that sense of irony, or for myself, just speaking about my own foibles, or whatever it might be, we're not trying to disguise whatever it is we're talking about. We're not trying to disguise the truth and then reveal it later on so we get a laugh out of it. So I think in the end I've whether or not that's breaking right speech, it seems to be pretty close to it. Whether or not it's like, because you are planning to reveal the truth, telling a mistruth seems to be still almost like you're lying, and then you reveal it very closely, right after you've lied. So I'm not sure if that maybe it's slightly less removed than just lying with the intention to keep that lie going and cover it up, but we could still say there's a mistruth being made, and so we do need to be careful with that. Just kidding. I remember many years ago, maybe 20 years ago, I was friends with somebody who said that a lot, just kidding. And it got to be to the point where it was really annoying Just it was a constant kind of, I couldn't take them seriously. And so I try to recollect that, and sometimes I lose my mindfulness around it. But I do see it as unbeneficial in the end. It's sort of like a cheap laugh. You get a bit of laughter, but what's the cost? And I think we should think about that and look at that. Ah, right. Thank you, Marilyn. It's Polonius in Shakespeare. So I think that's what I saw in my father's quote. So thank you for "To thine own self be true," is what Marilyn had said, is from Shakespeare's Hamlet. Another question, or another statement from Fugazi, is that humor could be considered a way of running from reality. And the other question is about, it depends on the intention, or the intention of the joke. I think that going back to what I was saying, of course the intention matters when you're talking about a joke, but still, whether or not our intention is to reveal a lie, for a moment somebody is possibly believing in what we're saying. If you can tell a lie where the person knows that what you're saying isn't meant to be true, from the moment you actually say it, and you're both in on that, you know it, then that I would say is even a step further back from wrong speech. But it still could be, I mean, who's around, who's listening, it still could be unskillful. You could think that they're going to understand you, but you don't. So it's sort of like a gamble. It's a possible gamble. So we need to be careful. And running from reality is true. Like, yeah, that sense of just kidding, or sometimes we say things to cover up our own sadness, or whatever it is that we're feeling, by using humor in that way. So again, sort of, if we're going to talk about wise humor, we need to be careful about how it is that we're using this this expression. People love humor. They love to laugh. It's a feeling of being included. So one way we can reflect on it is, are we excluding somebody when we're using humor? And often humor can be that way. When we're making fun of others, we're excluding someone. And sometimes we're including others in that. So we're actually engaging in divisive speech, because then people feel that they have something in common with the person who's making a joke, and they feel included. But the joke is at the expense of another person or a group of people. We can think about racist stereotypes, or sexual stereotypes, gender stereotypes, whatever it might be. And if we're in the particular gender, for example, that isn't being made fun of, then we feel that it might be funny for that other group, the group that we don't belong to. So this is it's a very important aspect of how we're practicing, just because humor is so alluring and enjoyable, and a lot of people are happy to be the funny one, the clever comedian. I know I can engage in that, and as a worldly, in a worldly sense, I need to be, for myself, very careful of that. Just because, again, it's an alluring thing. We like to make people laugh, and people like to be made to laugh. But that laughter needs to come from a sense of trust. For example, as I was talking, like, if you are making fun of somebody from outside the group of the people who are laughing at your joke, then what is the outcome of that? Won't those group of people who are laughing know that, oh, well, if he's able to make fun of these other people, wouldn't he be able to, or wouldn't he possibly also make fun of me in another situation, or my group? And so that's where we have to be really careful about how it is that we're using humor, and that it's not harming anybody in any way. One question you can have is, would you say this in front of anybody? Would you? And if it's not, then why is that? What's your intention there? there's another question here that that deals with. It's from Sunny, and Sunny, you might want to check my last talk on Tuesday, which deals with this question you have. How do we deal with anxieties about whether or not Buddhism is the perfect, truest spiritual practice? And so, yeah, in referring to the last talk I gave on Tuesday, it was about doubt. And this can be a continuing doubt for people, and so one needs to see that first and foremost as doubt. And this doesn't mean that one is then blindly following what one is being told to do in practice, but one's investigating, like, oh, how is this doubt is arising for me? Like, well, is it true that I am decreasing in my suffering or my stress when I practice the Buddha's teachings? So we're looking into whether it's actually causing us to sort of the promise that the Buddha speaks of, that our suffering gets less, and we have more insight into that and understand how greed and unwholesome desire are the cause. So it's really through investigation, but it's also stepping back from that doubt and knowing that as doubt. That very question might come up and keep coming up. Am I doing this right? Is the meditation right? Is and so we wanna kind of know that and say, like, well, I can't answer that question unless I'm willing to actually to investigate it and see what the response is, what is actually arising in my experience due to my own practice. And so we try to resolve it through questioning. Is it right? I'm not sure. And how do I know? And how can I know? But rather we want to just be very careful with how we're measuring that in ourselves. Well, am I not speaking harshly as much to people as I used to? Am I more aware of how I'm lying to others? Am I aware of stress and suffering that I'm causing myself? And so we're saying, oh, I guess maybe it is working. But you might find maybe it's not. And if it's not, then I don't think you just throw everything out. You try to investigate, why is it not working? Is there something maybe I can adjust here? And of course that can bring one into more doubt, like, am I doing it wrong? What should I do? I'm not sure. And so I would say also try different things. That's your sort of measure, is like, well, it's not questioning. You have to try it out and investigate yourself. And then that's what happens with that, is that confidence arises and doubt decreases. So you get more confident in yourself and what you are able to do with this particular path and how it works. So not everybody can make it work for themselves. And so whether that's a particular background karma one has, or an obstruction, or it just doesn't work for whatever reason, we're just trying to investigate and see, like, why that is and what's going on with it. But yeah. So I think I've spoken enough this morning, and I wish you all well. I was reflecting on that I don't know the future. I'm not sure if I was thinking I have about 4 more of these Fridays left, but I don't know. We'll see. Maybe there won't even be 4. We'll see if I live that long. Maybe I just won't be able to speak anymore. Just sit up here silently. But just that sense of not always being sure and trying to investigate that, rather than, okay, I'll have these 4 left, and I'm going here and doing that, and just trying to encourage that around that sense of, what do I know? That's where the doubt can also be helped, is just looking at anicca, that it's not really sure, and that our questions are often trying to be sure. We're trying to know, and we're very uncomfortable with not knowing. So it's good to try to kind of challenge that sense of, like, I know what's going to happen next, because I sure don't. I'm not sure how many people do. And it's funny how much we actually think we usually do know what's going to happen next, and how we somehow forget whenever it changes. No, I can still predict the future. So try to maybe have that as a little homework assignment to notice that uncertainty, and but also, as I've been speaking about, to notice how you can integrate the Eightfold Path every moment of your day, and just to remember when you find that you've fallen off for a moment, just to lightly bring yourself on and say, aha, I've fallen and now I can get up. And that's just what we need to do throughout most of our lives. We just kind of pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and not get too obsessed about our remorse and the things we've done wrong in our life, and to keep ourselves encouraging ourselves in this practice. All right, be well, have a good morning, and perhaps